Welcome to the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast with psychologist Dr. Doreen Downing. Listen in as Doreen interviews people who felt they didn't have a voice or who suffered extreme speaking anxiety. You'll hear stories about how they struggled to speak up, what they did to find their authentic voice, and the confidence they now feel to speak up and make an impact. If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. And now, here is Doreen.
Hi, this is Dr. Doreen Downing, and I'm a host of the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast. What I get to do today is introduce you to somebody who's calling in from the other side of the world, Ireland. And we're going to get to hear about her backstory growing up in that country, and then her journey to become the amazing woman she is today. Hi, this is Doreen Downing, and I'd like to introduce you to Linda Ford.
Hi, Doreen. Dr. Doreen. How do you like to be called?
Oh, I love my name, Doreen.
Yeah, it's a beautiful name.
And then recently not so recently, about 20 years ago, I got married and I took my husband's name, Doreen Downing.
I mean, how perfect is that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I didn't need my father's name anyway. We'll get more into parents and back history, but let me introduce you with the bio that you sent, because that shows people what is possible. Linda Ford is a master certified coach, instructor, and author. She works with women who want to find freedom from insecurity, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and the fear of being seen and heard. She coaches and teaches classes on how women can express themselves, stand out, get noticed, and create a bigger life for themselves. And Linda is the co-author of Women in Confidence, The Truth About the Lies We Tell Ourselves, and the creator of her signature programs, If I'm So Smart, Then Why Don't I Feel More Confident? Linda has recently relocated from the US to Ireland, where she plans on having small group retreats for women. I have to take a big breath. This is wonderful to be able to have a conversation, because I know the journey that we as women take from, sometimes dysfunctional childhoods to now being master coaches and serving others and showing them paths that we've walked because we know the way, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, Doreen, because I used to think that my past was unlucky. It was just something to be embarrassed and ashamed of. And of course, we can get into talking about that shift, how I've moved away from that. But it's my journey, my early life. I can see so clearly now how it was just setting me up for the life I have now. If you had have told me when I was a teenager, say, oh, you're going to go on to become a coach and you're going to coach women on insecurity and how to feel comfortable in your own skin and express yourself, I would have just thought, I'm sorry, you got the wrong person here. So it's one of those magical things about life, isn't it? How it just works itself out.
Well, I'm so glad you started there. Usually I dive first into the childhood, but I like the frame that you put around our conversation, that no matter what we have encountered, suffered, struggled with along the lines of growing up, there's always the meaning to it that I think we can make for ourselves that is positive. I guess it's like the whole idea about alchemy, the change process. Led into gold or something.
Led into gold, yeah. And not everybody achieves that either. Some of us get stuck in that in our past lives. But I've been fortunate that I managed to create a transformation in my life. And so would you like me to talk about that early life a little bit?
Absolutely. I love the way we are starting around this whole idea. Hello, folks out there. It's about transformation. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, how this young little girl who was
Yeah.
brought first into this world and what she faced and this beautiful woman that she's blossomed into. So yeah, Linda, let's start with any stories about how you came into this world and into what?
Yeah. So my early childhood, I was born into, I would say, a lot of poverty, very low working class, poor parents who worked in factories all their lives. They left school when they were 12, never had any training, never had any high skilled jobs. They had me and my brother when they were like, my mother was 20 when she had me, and my father was 22. So young, uneducated, hardworking. God love them, hardworking. And the house that we lived in, I remember from the ages of 1 until 6, I was raised in a house that was just one room the 4 of us lived in. We shared the house with an older woman, and she had the back room. And then we had a couple of bedrooms upstairs. We had no bathroom. We had just the sink in the living room, which was the sink for the kitchen as well. And we shared an outhouse, the toilets, with 4 other families. And every Friday, we had this tin aluminum bath that would hang out on the side, the wall outside the house. And that bath would come in and we'd have our weekly baths in this tin bath. So it was poor. I remember going to bed at night and my brother and I would share a room, and there was no central heating. So I could see our breath come out of us. And my mother would just fill the bed with hot water bottles. So I grew up, but the older I got, I became very much aware that they didn't know how to do life very well. And why would they? They were always struggling. There was always a lack of money. We were always just trying to get by. And so I grew up with this sense that there was something defective about our family. There was something like, how come my friends had a different experience with their parents and could go on vacations, and we just couldn't get it together? I grew up with a lot of shame around it. When you grow up in a family like that, you can't help but think, what's wrong with us? What am I missing? We obviously are defective in some way. That whole mindset, of course, I didn't have that word back then. I saw everything through that filter. My self-esteem was low. I was very insecure. There were no discussions in our house about joy or love or creating a great life or anything. I was groomed to grow up and go into a factory or a shop or become a secretary at best. Nothing wrong with those things, but that was my destiny. There was also a lot of emotional violence, not sexual violence, but my parents were constantly bickering and arguing.
Oh,
And so by the time I was allowed to leave, I was out of there as quick as I could. And I left home when I was 17 and went to Australia, as one does. I
as
had to go
one does.
3,000 miles far away,
Uh-huh.
thinking that the distance would help me in my life.
I want to pause there because
Yeah.
that scene, that first scene you created for us, it was just like a movie scene, the beginning of a movie. Here we are in this one room and the bathtub out on the outside and the
Yeah.
warm bottles in the bed because it's so cold and the breath coming out. It really seemed like we're starting a movie right now, and it's poverty. It's pure poverty. And this little girl. One thing I did pick up though is that the mom, your mom, as I started
Yeah.
talking about it as if it was a movie, your mom did do something nurturing like those warm bottles in the bed.
Yeah, my mother was very emotionally detached. She wasn't there emotionally for me, but that's because she was trying to hold it all together. I can see that now so clearly. And my father was the emotional, the big heart parent. So they were good people and they were doing their best. But It's understandable how when you are raised within a system, a class system too, as it was in England, you're told to stay in your lane. There was no question that I would go to college or have any of those kinds of aspirations. There was poverty and there was the class structure. All that stuff goes into creating you. And I look back and I can see all the building blocks. It was just this perfect, who I was and how I turned out in my early 20s was a product of all of that. I'll give you an example. When I first left home, first of all, I went to London. And just to give you an example of how insecure I was and how my self-esteem was so low, I did not want to get a full-time job like my friends were doing. I always insisted on doing temp work because back then temp work was really popular.
Yes.
So I'd go and do temp work in offices and typing and that stuff. And the reason I did that, I was a temp for about a year and I refused to do full-time work, is because I was so embarrassed that they would find out how stupid I was or how ill-equipped I was to do, how unintelligent I was to do whatever they wanted. And I wanted to have an easy out. I'd take on a job and then I knew within 2 weeks I'd move on to somewhere else. In some ways, I look back and I see, wow, how brilliant that was. I figured that out. That's how I would protect myself, right?
Yes, you were dodging.
I was just surviving. And I just didn't want other people to see me, the full me, because the full me, in my opinion, wasn't up to par. In fact, there was one job I got, Doreen, that I completely screwed it up. And I was so embarrassed that I just grabbed my handbag and I ran away. It's like I ran away from school, you know? So, yeah.
Well, because we're talking about voice also today, I mean, that's pretty much the core. And I think what you've just done for us by painting the picture of your early life and the poverty that you experienced, it seems like, how does a person have a voice in a system that's already set up and that it feels like you're surviving, but it seems like you brought in some intuition around, hey, this doesn't quite feel right, that I need to get out of here.
The big event of my life was actually making the decision to move to America.
Oh.
And America, for me, the experience of it held the promise of opportunity. When I came to the States, it's like everybody seemed a lot freer from us Brits. This is a generalization, but there is some truth to it. And I just love the openness of America and the fact that you didn't have to be from an upper class family to go to college or to express yourself. I really noticed the difference between the class structure. The one thing I loved about America, it just offered me this psychological and physical freedom that I never experienced in the UK.
Oh, I can feel the sense of being drawn into and toward your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. It was just perfect. It called me. And it's funny, I always wanted to go to the States because I had aunties who were ward brides and they always talked about the States. It's not that as soon as I got there, I just found myself, found my voice. I didn't. It took a long time, but it was the beginning of that journey for sure. America played a big role for me in that sense.
One of the messages I hear here for our listeners is that the sense of what you're drawn to, the trust in that, even though you don't know that that's where it's leading you, there's something about the positivity that you said, the freedom is what I felt. And that is America, the land of the free.
Yeah, it felt right. It felt like this is the way life should be.
Oh, good.
And everybody in America was like really expressive. I just thought it was wonderful. And I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. But like I said, it didn't happen automatically. I mean, it took me 35 years before I felt as if I was good enough to go to college in America, because I ended up marrying an American. And I was 35 when I first started college because I never thought I had it. I never thought, that's the phrase I used to use all the time. Everybody has it except me. Everybody has confidence. Everybody has this intelligence and creativity, but I didn't have it. But I eventually went to college. And the irony is that I graduated with 4.0 average in my bachelor's and my master's. I did 6 years straight.
Yes.
And even though I went on to become a teacher, I was an adjunct professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, teaching writing. I've done international development work, very high level meetings, meeting lots of important people. And even though all of that happened to me after I graduated college there, I still had this strong imposter syndrome. It was there. It was like, someone's going to find out one day where I came from and that I don't belong in this job.
Well, it's interesting that the imposter syndrome, which is at the core, some of us have that at our core just because of our first experiences coming into life, but the awareness of it and the embracing of it like you've done. Yeah, I understand, little imposter. How come you feel that way inside? Because look at your circumstances, but look at us now.
Yeah, exactly. Those insecurities and imposter syndrome. I mean, I can still feel a little nervous when I speak, when I do public speaking or come on a podcast like this, but it doesn't have anything. It was not like it was before. My whole relationship with it has changed. It's always going to be there, I think, but it's just not a contender. It doesn't have the charge, that's the word, that it used to have. It could knock me off completely where I go into hiding. But now it's just, I understand what it is. That's the big thing, is that we hear a lot of people who want to overcome their insecurity and who want to find their voice. There's a lot of self-help books out there that have great advice. And as you can see, I've got lots of books behind me. I've got tons of books in this room, Doreen, and I've read so much. And I was able to gather some really good coping and managing skills for the issues that were coming up with for me. But I reached a point, and I think it was about 10 years ago, where I realized that as much as those books helped me, and the tools and the tactics and the strategies, I was finding that it wasn't going deep enough. It was all like cognitive based, right? It got me along for sure, but I could sense that there was something deeper that I wasn't understanding about where this was coming from. So I don't know if you want to ask me some questions about that, or
well, you're at well, my dear, you're at the threshold, and I certainly can relate, given I had my PhD in psychology and still was hiding, and had done Toastmasters and all the other kinds of trainings to get over my fear of speaking. But deep inside, there remained a part of me. I think my most powerful, precious part was still hiding, and I had to go even deeper. So what do you mean by going even deeper?
Well, ultimately, I'll give you the cliff notes right up front. It was a spiritual solution. It was understanding, coming to an understanding of who I am, who I really am, who we are, we human beings, that here I am in this earth suit, right? I've got this body, this physical body, and I've got this amazing mind. But I had this understanding, I came across this understanding where I really got it, that I am, this is what I call my small self. Then I realized that there's a big self. There's another self that has nothing to do with all that conditioning, all that early upbringing. That's just something that I went through. There's an incident that happened to me, a coaching session actually with Martha Beck, Dr. Martha Beck. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's quite well known, actually. She writes for Oprah's magazine. I'm one of her master coaches. what happened was I was doing my master coach training, and we were all sitting in there's about 15 of us in training. And you know how when you sit in a circle, she was having us all make a comment about a case study that we were diving into. And I just froze, and I knew that my turn was coming up. And I just went blank. I lost all my focus. And I thought, I'm going to really embarrass myself here. I started sweating, and I was like feeling panicked. And I thought, I've just got to come clean. I can't pretend I know what I'm talking about. And so my turn came, and I just confessed. I said, Martha, I've lost my focus. I don't know what to say. Everybody's said some good stuff, but I don't know what to say. She could see I was upset. She said to me, it's the most brilliant question. She said, Linda, how old are you right now?
Oh.
I knew, as soon as she asked the question, I knew I was a 6-year-old little girl sitting in the back of the classroom because I didn't know how to do an arithmetic exercise, and all the other kids were playing, and I was sent to the back of the room, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So what I did is I got up, I asked to go to the toilets, and when I was there, I got my hat and coat and I ran home, ran away from school.
There you go again, that pattern of just
That running away,
sailing out of there.
Yeah, get me out of here. I was so humiliated, and the shame of it. What they did the next morning is they made me come back, the head teacher, and I had to stand in front of the classroom and apologize. That moment was a defining moment for me as a child. That we have these defining moments that tell us who we are. All my life, Doreen, I have always felt, even today, when I take a class or some program, I'm always nervous that I'm not as good as other people, that I can't keep up with them. And so that pattern, I could see that pattern coming through, and it's just there, it's in your DNA. But the minute I connected that moment to my coaching session with Martha, I just broke down in tears. I could just say, oh yes, I'm that little 6-year-old girl. I've been carrying that message. I've been carrying it with me my whole friggin' life. And I saw it. I just saw it so clearly. So that woke me up. That was like an awakening, in a sense, of how that was just something that happened to me as a kid. There was nothing. I just had a teacher who was hopeless, who didn't have any sensitivity, and it was nothing on me. How many of us, the people listening to this now, we've all had those experiences, right? We've all had something where we've made it mean something negative about ourselves.
Oh yeah, I have so many stories about that. I'm glad you connected to being an adult and being all of a sudden in a state of being that was, well, we call it regression, regressed back to an earlier moment in your life where you're stuck there. But the breakthrough of finally exposing it in a safe way, I think, is partly what the healing is about. And you mentioned spiritual. What?
Yeah.
Can you say just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's the reason why I don't do a lot of cognitive work with my clients. I don't do a lot of going back. Yeah, we can find the story that led to our thinking. That's good. I do that. I make those connections. But what I used to do was that I would do a lot of work on helping clients find more uplifting thoughts, change their thinking. And I don't do any of that now. And my approach is, you don't have to change your thinking, but you have to understand what thinking is. And it's a really important distinction. It's like, if you understand what it is, it's like when I was that little 6-year-old girl, I just had some self-conscious thinking. That's all it was. And I spent my whole life ruminating on it. But when you can see it for what it is, you don't really have to do anything with it. You just notice that that's the thought that's having an impact. But a thought, it doesn't have to have that impact when you understand what it is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And what I'm thinking about also, because of the spiritual, as you referred to, our sense of self is not those thoughts. Our sense of ourself is a state of being that is, at least in the way that I describe it, is purely positive and
Yes.
is open. I don't want to put too many characteristics on it, but how would you describe this state of being where more truth is of who you are?
Yeah, well, the other thing that I really saw was that the confidence that I was longing for my whole life, and the ability to express myself, that confidence and creativity and all that stuff. I always used to think that it was just something that some people have and some don't, and they have it and I don't, right? And I've come to see that the bigger part of us, the spiritual side of us, all that stuff is innate. It's already there.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do all this stuff to bring it in. It needs to be uncovered.
Yes.
And the thing that's covering it up is the belief in those stories, the one that I carried with me for so many years. So in a sense, we have these layers, and it's all innocent. It's just the way life happened. Someone said something to us when we were young, or our parents mistreated us, or a friend abused us, or whatever. And we built this armor around ourselves to protect ourselves. And then we started to believe what other people told us who we were. These are just layers and layers of thought. And those thoughts become belief systems where we think we are a certain way. But I always like to give the example of Michelangelo, where he is trying to carve the stone. And he always maintained that, I'll get this wrong, but the basic gist of it is that the essence of what he wanted to carve was already there. And he just had to chip away the layers to reveal the beautiful statue. And it's no different.
He saw the angel in the marble.
The angel in the marble, exactly. That's what I came to see, is that I've had it all along. I had one conversation with a coach where I was complaining about, why is it that I just feel so burdened by this insecurity and self-doubt? I just feel like, why haven't I got it? And he turned to me and he said, but Linda, you've always had it. You've always had it, but it's just been covered over. You forgot who you really were, that big version of ourselves. I heard that on a very deep level when he said that. You've always had it. You've never not had it. But it's just your life circumstances that got it covered over so you could protect yourself. And so I love hearing that, because when I heard it, I just felt that it was the truth. It just rang true. You know how sometimes when people say something to you, you think, oh, that feels so true.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
That's the feeling I had.
That was the same experience I had in one of those early classes in overcoming my fear of speaking. I had a teacher who said that story, and that's what stuck with me too, is that all my PhD, all my professional, all my business, all my expert, everything was wrapped around this essence of me that was too afraid to come out. Well, we're getting close to the end, so I want to make sure that if there's something you want to say about your process or what you offer, like how do you help people tap into that deeper nature, and also how do people find you?
Yeah. So when I heard that, you've always had it, did I wake up the next day and feel confident? No. I've had years of conditioning, of habits, habitual ways of thinking about myself. You don't just wake up. Some people do, like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie. They're the fortunate ones. But for most of us, we still have this conditioning. After hearing that, I just decided that if that is true, then I'm going to live my life and be in life as if it is true. I've got to trust that it's there. It took some courage, because when you're not used to putting yourself out there and speaking up, I mean, it's scary. But the alternative, I thought, well, what's the alternative to just be quiet, to just sit back and watch everybody else do what I want to do. And I wasn't prepared to do that. And so it was the combination of understanding who I really am, really understanding that, and taking action in little increments. Yeah. It's just a beautiful combination, because if you're just sitting back thinking about, oh, I have everything I need, or I'm naturally confident, and you don't do anything with it, it just becomes like an intellectual exercise. It's like all the theory, but no practice. And I found that just over the years, blending those two together, living as if I had everything, and I had to trust that, and just taking the risk, disrupting myself. I had to disrupt myself gently. I felt like all of that stuff has just been falling away over the years, over the last 10 years for me. I met an old girlfriend I hadn't seen in 20 years just a few weeks ago. She came to visit me in Ireland. And she just stood back and she says, "You are so different." That was lovely confirmation. And I can see it. I feel it viscerally, how I'm different, because I don't care as much about what people think about me. I mean, I do, of course, it's normal, but I really don't. And I've learned to trust who I am. Mm-hmm. So I would just say to your listeners, just try that experiment, test it out, because guess what? No matter how insecure you feel right now, I can bet you that if you look back on your life, you can identify moments, and they could be just moments, when you were confident. You did shine, you did express yourself, and then you'd fall back into your old habit again. The question I'd like to leave with your listeners is, how do you explain that? How come you were confident for those moments? Was it just a fluke? Were the stars just aligned? Did you get out of bed the right side that day? Really get curious about that, because that's evidence that you have it. That's the evidence right there. And don't write it off like I used to do.
Well, take it from somebody who knows. For those who are only listening, you're missing a beautiful, radiant woman here who is just so full of belief and joy about what's possible for us. And thank you for being a model for that, Linda. How do people find you?
Well, thank you for that, Doreen. I appreciate that. That was lovely.
Yeah.
They can go to my website, lindafordcoaching.com. There's a free guide on the homepage. You'll see it once you're there. And I would love you to read it and get back to me and start a conversation, because that's how we evolve. That's how we bring about these changes in our life, is by sharing, being vulnerable, and starting a conversation. Express yourself, right?
Right. And the expression is always more powerful if you have a listener like Linda and like myself, who can hold everything that you say and believe in the truth of who you really are. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for all you do in this world. You have a beautiful body of work.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being with us today for this episode of Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. Each person Doreen interviews shares what has helped them find their voice. You can learn from these guests and find your voice so you can be confident to speak up and speak out. And remember to download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and will return next time. Until then, goodbye for now.